So here we are into the fourth. What are you doing back there? Are you misbehaving? They are We're into the fourth month of January. We have the fourth Sunday in January. We have one more Sunday this month. It's a long Sunday month, 5 of them. But we are exploring, as we always do in January, getting back to the basics of our science of mind teachings. And this month we have done that in a little bit of a different way, and then I've simply taken some terms and phrases that are somewhat unique to our language, our science of mind language, and put them in English. And we've explored them and talked about applying them. And then if that wasn't enough, I decided that, we need to just throw in a couple of new words, totally different words that Ernest Holmes didn't use, but that could be very valuable to us, and literally really not words, but words that we're making up. So in the past, the last couple of Sundays, we've explored things like the divine creative process and the law and the absolute and consciousness, false beliefs, demonstrations, spiritual truth, all those kinds of concepts we have unpacked, if you will. Next Sunday, we'll do a really good review on them, and then we'll open it up and have an opportunity to ask questions or talk about whatever you might want to talk about. So be thinking about questions that you have about our teachings, and we'll explore that next month in a fun, interactive service. We also, one word that we added new to, Ernest Holmes did not use this word because it isn't really a word. You won't find it in the dictionary, although somebody, the week that we talked about it 2 weeks ago, told me it is actually in Wikipedia. So Wikipedia changes quicker than dictionaries do. So this word is on Wikipedia. And what was the word? Who remembers? Pronoia, being proanoid, meaning having a true belief that the universe is conspiring for your good all the time. That's being proanoid. So we added a word to our vocabulary 2 weeks ago. Last week we got back to some Ernest Holmes words. Today we're going to take another new word. And that new word is habitude. Habitude. And what the heck is habitude? Well, I'll tell you in a moment, but first I want to share with you the origins of the word. But before that, even a little story, because I think it's fun to see how it connects. So Dr. Harry Morgan Moses, who is a religious science minister, he has a church now in the San Diego area, for many, many years he was the founder and for many years the president of the affiliated New Thought Network, which is the umbrella organization that CLF belongs to. And so because Harry had that role, I heard him speak a lot at conferences that I would go to. And many times he was speaking exclusively to a group of ministers about ministerial things. Sometimes that was about public speaking and, honing your craft as a speaker. I heard him say more than once that if you as a speaker quote someone else, and you attribute that quote to someone else, if you do that 3 times, after that, it's become yours. You don't need to give credit to who said it originally. Now, that was Harry's view of things. It's yours, you make it yours. So I've thought about that, and I don't want to do this in this instance because the word habitude is not mine. I did not make it up. Although I have used it more than 3 times, so I could just use it. But I want to give credit to Harry Morgan Moses, who actually did coin that word. So, Harry, I'm not taking your advice by not quoting the author or the originator of that word because it was you. So I want to acknowledge Dr. Harry for coming up with that great term. What does it mean? A habitude is a habit of attitude. So a habit is something we've done over and over and over again, and it now simply becomes the way we do it, and it's somewhat automatic, right? Isn't that a habit? We just do it. We don't even think about it anymore, and we do it. Attitude is a feeling or a way of thinking that affects our behavior, which we now know because we've been in this teaching this month or longer. We know that affects our experience out in the world and what we attract back into our lives. So a habitude is even at this point unconscious, automatic way of thinking or feeling that then dictates how we show up in life. That's what a habitude is. In Harry's book, Obvious Power 25 Habitudes That Shift Your Thoughts and Actions, he writes, a major aspect of creating habitudes is being able to think in a new way about subjects which are familiar to us. A good habitude causes the spontaneous first reaction of our mind to move us in the direction of our fulfillment. If we can layer our habitudes in such a way that our responding and acting in a forward, life-giving manner becomes as natural as breathing, we will have mastered life. I love that last line. I want to say it again. If we can layer our habitudes in such a way that our responding and acting in a forward, life-affirming manner becomes as natural as breathing, we will have gained mastery over life. So I'm hoping today, knowing today, my intention for today is that we recognize, first of all, the power of our habitudes. That we recognize the power that our habitudes have to create a life that is either fulfilling or not so much. And I think we probably all, many of us in this room have been in these teachings for a while. We know in our head that what we think and feel and believe, our consciousness, that's a word we defined recently, right? Our consciousness being the totality of who we are that we bring to the table of life, and it consists of how many things? Quick, thank you, and attitude happens to be one of them, right? That we know that that is the creative energy and force in our lives, and we call back into our lives that which we have in our consciousness. And sometimes what's in our consciousness is unconscious, meaning we're not aware of it, but it's still like a beacon out there sending out that light going, come to me, or it's a magnet pulling things in. So even though we know that, do you know someone who might have a habitude that does not support a life that's fulfilled and joy-filled and prosperous and healthy and whole and connected and on purpose? Do you know anybody who has any habitudes that maybe, yeah, you know somebody, right. They're not here, though. No. They might be watching. You're probably watching, that's right. You're not here in the room. Yeah, so what I want you to do is just turn to somebody next to you and say, do you have a habitude that doesn't support you? Just ask them that. Wow. That's a lot of conversation. That's a lot of conversation. So what I know is that the level of volume and kind of Twitter about something means we've hit a nerve, right? We've hit a nerve. So we have habitudes, automatic ways of showing up in the world in our thoughts and our feelings and behaviors that maybe don't fully support a God-centered, fulfilled, joy-filled life. So today I am going to give you a practice that's 3 steps to help you absolutely instill new habitudes. Here's the deal about it, a disclosure about this right off the bat. This is nothing new. I am not going to tell you something you haven't heard before, and this is not a big, deep, esoteric teaching. It's basic. And the question is, are we doing it? I've quoted this woman enough to be able to use her quote without attributing it to her, but I'm going to attribute to her anyway. Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman, who was the founder of a mega New Thought church in Chicago. Dr. Johnny made her transition about a little over a year ago, but she was this amazing powerhouse of a woman. How many of you have ever seen or heard Reverend Johnny talk? Yes. Tall African-American woman with a presence that you paid attention to the second she walked in the room, because she had, my friends, an attitude. That kind of attitude, right? You know, you guys who know her know that attitude she had, and the finger was often up, although there was a white hanky in the hand, always a white hanky in the hand. But what she would say is, honey, it works you can quote it, if you work it. It works if you work it. So I'm asking you this morning, 3 simple steps. Are you working them? Spontaneous music from the band. Or from a band member's phone, I would suspect. I'm not sure. But it was music. We're a musical church here. We love music. It's all good. I don't know whose it is because they all look embarrassed, so I'm not sure. It was. Oh, Pam's like, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was them. It was the guys. It had to be the guys. All right. So Ernest Holmes tells us in the Science of Mind textbook, we might well remember always that unless we control our thought, it will control us. Creating new habitudes is a way of controlling our thoughts. So our crazy stuff that can go on in there does not run like a runaway train in our minds and then create a runaway train in our lives. Here's another statement from a modern thought leader. It goes like this. Most of us are still operating out of the mental architecture of our ancestors. In other words, to put it into today's language, most of us are operating out of ancestral habitudes. We think we're running our lives with our brilliant ideas and thoughts. We think we're affirming our intentions and creating new possibilities, but in reality, we're simply recycling old tapes, knee-jerk conditioning, and automatic behaviors, which most of us picked up before we were 5. Ooh, that's right, lasered in there, on point. And anybody want to take a stab at who might have said that? Here's a hint. If you come back today at 1 o'clock, you'll get to hear from her. Yeah, that is a quote from Pam Grout out of her amazing book, E Squared. And we are so excited to have Pam with us. She'll be actually in the service. She's not in here right now, but she'll be in the service in a bit to talk a little bit more about her workshop this afternoon. So I'm going to give you a 3-step process to help create new habitudes. Practice, or step 1, is to notice when you get hooked with an attitude that does not feel good. If you are having a moment, a reaction to something that doesn't feel good, there's anger, there's resentment, there's fear, there's doubt, there's, that myriad of emotions that we have. You might want to take a peek at the attitude that you had right before the feeling. Mm-hmm. So we say to become observant of our what's going on in our head. We call it become the observer, or the compassionate witness. That was a Wayne Dyer term. Become the compassionate witness who just witnesses what's going on in there. We say, stand guard the portal of your mind. That's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Mary Morrissey says, pay attention to what you're paying attention to. I just say, just plain English, stay awake. Stay awake instead of being on automatic pilot. Stay awake instead of being on automatic pilot. But if you aren't the compassionate witness, if you're not observing, if you're not standing at the portal of your mind, guard at the portal of your mind, if you're not staying awake, and if you are on automatic pilot, a great way to know is just to look at how you feel and then go backwards. Wow, something just happened here. I don't feel good about that at all. I'm feeling disempowered, or I'm, feeling afraid, or whatever that emotion is. Look back and ask yourself, what attitude did I just have? And then the second question is, this is the one that really gets it, is, and how often have I had that attitude? Oh, like since I was 5? Maybe that's a habitude. Maybe that's an indication that that is a habitude that does not support you. So step 1 in our practice is to pay attention when you get hooked. And if you can't pay attention in the moment, if you're not staying vigilant in the moment, then just look back. The more you do that, and we'll get there in a second, but the more you do that, the shorter the distance becomes between the habitude and the awareness. It becomes shorter. First step, pay attention. Obviously, that's not the only step. we could pay attention until the cows come home, and that won't change anything unless we make a change, which is practice number 2. It is to start installing a new attitude. So what attitude would be supportive of a life of joy and happiness and abundance and health and vitality and God-centeredness and living on purpose? What attitude would support that? Oftentimes it's the opposite of the one you just had. That's a good way to know. What would a good attitude be? Well, whatever the opposite is of what you just were thinking a second ago, whatever your attitude just was. I love Benjamin Franklin. He spoke to this practice when he said, who's strong? The person who is strong is the one who can conquer a bad habit. A bad habit in our minds today is a bad habit, quote unquote bad, of thought. Bad habit of thought, of attitude is just something that doesn't support and serve you. Now you may say, well, that's hard. That's really hard. I've tried. It's hard. Okay, well, you can whine a little bit about that. Okay, maybe it is a little bit hard. Of course, you might look at that and say, how many other things in your life do you whine about and say they're hard? That could right there be a habitude of thinking life is hard. Right there could be an indicator. I want to ask this. How many of you have quit smoking? Oh, look around. Look around. These are all people who broke a habit that's quote unquote hard to break. But I started again. Oh dear, who said that? All right. You ready to quit it for good? Or did you quit it for good? Yeah. She's not going to say. You don't have to answer that question. That's a private question, but we're supporting you in really changing that habit. You can change a habit. It is possible, I promise. Lonnie stopped that. You didn't hear that. Lonnie said you have to quit drinking first, but he didn't really say that. So you're not going to listen to that. We can choose. I like this term. We can choose a fresh alternative. Choose a fresh alternative. Charles Fillmore, who is the co-founder of the Unity movement, in a great little book that he wrote called The Atom-Smashing Power of Mind, isn't that a great title? He said this, your mind, body, and affairs are the expression of your thoughts. So if you are not happy, change your mental habits. This may not seem practical to you at first, but if you faithfully practice, you will witness practical results. You can cultivate the habit of seeing the good, the true, the bright side of every subject. So step number 1 of our practice is to notice. Step number 2 is to choose a fresh alternative. So I'm going to give you a story of someone who was working on this and opted to choose a fresh alternative. And I just have to introduce it by saying, I do not feel that First Service gave this story its proper acknowledgement. I'm just saying, I don't think they knew what to, they're like, what? Is she serious? Is she not serious? Okay, so you have been put on notice that a good part of this isn't serious, okay? So it's supposed to be humorous. And of course, I'm just realizing that as a speaker, if you have to set a story up like that, you probably shouldn't be telling the story. But I've already gone down the rabbit hole far enough that I have to continue on down it. So here's the story of a woman who had an altercation with her beloved husband and realized a little bit after the fact that her reaction, her habitude of responding was not one that promoted a healthy, harmonious relationship. She got defensive and angry and shot back nasty things at him. And I'm sure you know somebody who responds like that, right? Whenever anyone says something to us we don't like. But again, they're not here, they're watching online. So she realized that is how she followed step 1, which was to pay attention. She paid attention like, oh, geez, that's what I did. And she knew that she had to choose a fresh alternative, and she needed a little bit of help with that because she was angry and upset. And then she noticed the day and the time and realized that that her church choir was getting ready to rehearse in about a half an hour. And she loved to go to choir rehearsal. She hadn't been in a while. She loved it. Her teenage son loved to go sing, also in the choir. So she thought this would be a great way for me to kind of get a new attitude, and then I can come home after the choir practice and have a different conversation with my husband. So she gets her son, and off they go to choir practice. And it was a beautiful experience, uplifting, empowering. She felt so good when it was over. She felt so good, she decided to go into the church's bookstore to just to look around and see if there was anything she might take that would, kind of help her along. And she saw a bumper sticker that said, "Honk if you love Jesus." So she thought, perfect, I'm going to get that. That'll make me feel good. So she gets it, she puts it on her bumper sticker, and off she goes. Let me give you her words of the uplifting experience that followed. "I was stopped at the light of a busy intersection, just lost in my thoughts and feeling how I was going to make amends with my husband when I got home, and I was feeling so good that I didn't notice that the green light suddenly turned red, that the red light suddenly turned green." This could be part of the problem. I'm thinking that right there could have been part of the problem here. So, thank you for helping me stay on track here. I didn't notice that the light had turned green. So she's, when suddenly, a lot of people obviously love Jesus. Why, the boy behind me started to honk like crazy, in fact, and he even yelled, "Go, Jesus, go." This is really bad, I know, but Jesus absolutely had a sense of humor. I know he did. So everyone else started honking too. So I leaned out of my window and waved and smiled to all those loving people. There must have been a guy from Florida back there somewhere in the line, because I could hear him yelling something about a sunny beach. I don't know. And I saw him waving in a funny way with only one finger. I asked my son in the back seat what that meant. My son was so caught up in the joy of the moment that he could hardly catch his breath from laughing. But he finally told me that it was the Hawaiian good luck sign. So I leaned out the window and gave him the good luck sign right back. A couple of people were so caught up in the joy of this moment that they got out of their cars and were walking toward me. I know they just wanted to celebrate with me. But then I noticed that the light was starting to change again, so I stepped on the gas and got through. It's a good thing I did, because I was the only car to get across the intersection. But as I looked back at all of my new friends standing there, I leaned out of the window and gave them a big smile and held up that Hawaiian good luck sign one more time as I drove away. Thank you. I should have learned my lesson in first service, but I can be a slow learner. To bring it back to the quote that I gave a moment ago, the serious quote, you can cultivate the habit of seeing the good, seeing the truth, seeing the bright side of every subject. That is practice step number 2. The third step really is not so much a step, but a way of life. I alluded to it a moment ago, and that is to realize that this exploration of shifting our habitudes is a way of life. It isn't a one-shot deal necessarily. We might not say one time, "Oh, that was an automatic reaction. That was an automatic pilot kind of thing," and never, and I'm going to replace it with a more life-affirming response and have that be the only time we ever have to do that. We just might have to do it a time or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 100 or 200. But so what? Why not? What else have we got to do, right? And as we're making that shift, we are shifting our lives. As Dr. Harry said in the quote I shared at the beginning, when we can make having our positive, affirmative habitudes as spontaneous as breathing, then we will have mastered life. And so the practice of it, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, by the way? You practice, practice, practice. Well, how do you create new habitudes and the amazing life that comes off of them? We practice, practice, practice. One of the reasons that this center, Creative Living Fellowship, is called a religious science church and teaching center is because we believe so much in the power of taking classes during the week to really help deepen into the practice, practice, practice. We're held accountable to practice. We're held accountable for what is coming out of our mouth, which is an indication of what's going on in our habitudes. Classes are an amazing way to help us really make those shifts on a deep, continual basis. So they started last week. I applaud all of you who are in a class right now. If you did not register and think after that, like, ooh, maybe I should, maybe that would be a good thing. There are two that you could still get in. One of them is only 4 weeks, so it's you miss 1 week, you've kind of missed a lot. But two of them are much longer classes. And so the Foundations of Practical Spirituality, which I have the honor of teaching, amazing class for really helping shift our habitudes. The other one is, if you've already had foundations and you're ready to go to another level, it's personal growth with Pete Waring, who is just a beautiful teacher, one of our spiritual life coaches, and just a beautiful class. So interested in that, Reverend Jorge Suarez, our education assistant, is here today, and he'd be happy to help you with that. So I want us to instill a particular habitude this morning. A really good one, a really powerful one that could kind of be a blanket habitude for a lot of things. But I want to set it up by telling you the story of where it came from, giving attribution to the creator, the originator of this statement. It actually is biblical. It comes out of Genesis, beginning at about chapter 37. The story then goes on through the end of Genesis. I'll make it a short version. Many of you know it. Some of you may not. It is a story of a young boy by the name of Joseph, whose father was Jacob. Joseph was the youngest of many, many sons of Jacob and was the favorite of Jacob. By far the favorite son. He was so favored that his father had made for him a coat of many colors. You may now know who I'm talking about, because you've seen the play, right? That's how you know. You've seen the Andrew Lloyd Webber amazing play, Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. If you've never seen that play, it's really great. The music is incredible. But it comes from a biblical story. So the story is that Joseph is so favored by his father that his many, many brothers are jealous as all get out. Just so jealous. They're just consumed with envy. And one day they decide they want to get rid of this kid. He's a pain. They want to get rid of him. And they decide as a group to take him off and kill him. Things can get a little violent in the Old Testament. They did. But nonetheless, it's teaching us lessons. It's beautiful lessons. So they get to the place they're going to kill him. And one of the brothers has a bit of a conscience and says, you know what, maybe we shouldn't kill him. That's a little extreme. Why don't we do something else? But let's not kill him. So they all agreed, all right, we won't kill him. So they dug a ditch, a deep pit, and they threw him in it and said, whatever happens to him now, we didn't kill him, it's up to him now to whatever. So off they went, and they left him. Back to our pronoia idea. God is always conspiring for our good. There was good being conspired here, which really does take us to our new affirmation, our new habitude, but we'll get there in a second. So he gets found by a group heading through, which was part of the royalty in Egypt, part of the Pharaoh's inner circle. And they find him there, and they take him back to Egypt and to the center of Egypt. And I won't go through the long story of all that he went through. It was not an easy path. It was tumultuous, let's put it that way. He spent some time in prison. He was a slave, and he was in prison, and but he had an ability to prophesize the future through his dreams. And he had a dream one night about the Pharaoh. He got the message to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was so grateful to have been warned about this impending thing that would happen to him that he got Joseph out of prison and actually made him his advisor. So Joseph went from being a slave imprisoned to being at the right hand of the Pharaoh. In one of Joseph's dreams, he saw that there was going to be a huge famine across the entire the entire territory of Egypt, a huge famine. And he said, this is not going to happen right away, but it is going to happen. And so we need to start saving, stockpiling grain and food so that our people will have something to eat when this famine hits. So the Pharaoh listened to him and said, absolutely yes. So they had stockpiles, silos and silos and silos full of food. Pretty soon the famine did hit, and people from all over Egypt walked and came, rode their camels and came to the Pharaoh's castle to ask for food. Among those was, guess who? The brothers who had left him for dead. They came to get grain. When they saw who was handing out the grain, which was Joseph, the Bible doesn't say they freaked out, but I'm going to say they freaked out. Well, wouldn't you? I mean, the guy who's going to save your life is the guy you left for dead? Not so much. But anyway, they were desperate. And so they came up and they were contrite and begging for forgiveness. And Joseph didn't really want to hear anything about their forgiveness. He simply said to them, you may have meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Not just good for them, not just good for Joseph, but good for the entire Egyptian people. If Joseph had not been there, they wouldn't have known about the famine. They would have starved. You may have meant it for evil. God meant it for good. So we're going to carve off that you may have meant it for evil part because we don't need that piece. But there probably are things in our lives where we look at it and go, ugh, that was hurt. Somebody hurt me on that, or this situation was hurtful or harmful or upsetting. Here's a habitude I want us to instill. God meant that for good. God meant that for good. So just say that out loud with me because we're going to really instill. God meant that for good. Charles Fillmore, in his book Talks on Truth, I'm being a unity minister this morning apparently, said, pronounce every experience good and of God. And by that mental attitude, you will call forth only the good. What seemed error will disappear, and only the good will remain. This is the law, and no one can break it. That which is adversarial always flees before the mind that is fixed on the pure, the just, and the upright. So I want to leave you with a final thought, also coming from the Bible, that could be another set of habitudes. These are words written by the Apostle Paul, who wrote them in a letter to the Philippians. You may recognize this. Finally, brethren, he wrote, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, are pure, are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. And so I say to you, my brethren and sisterin, we've just made up a new word, I think. Make these habitudes. Listen to these things inside here. Move forward with these things in mind. And you will come to know what you really already know, which is that God means it all for your highest and best good. So let's anchor this in prayer. Not just in prayer, but in an opportunity to apply this right now in our lives. God meant it for good. Do you have an it in your life right now? An it being a relationship that's tough, a physical diagnosis that's scary, a sadness in your heart, a financial challenge. Do you have an it right now in your life? If you do, I want you to know that God means it for good, for your good, for your expansion, for your evolution, for your deepening, for your ability to be a bigger light in the world, for the world to have a greater experience of you and to be blessed by you. This is what that it is really about. So we bring the habit of attitude, a new habitude here, to look at it, and those its change and they vary as our lives unfold, but to look at whatever the it is of the moment and to know that it is for good, meant for good, by that infinite wisdom and intelligence, by that divine love, by that creative energy that we call God, that flows in you, through you, and as you, that you are already one of. But it's just sometimes our habitudes get in the way of knowing that. So in this morning, we know what we already know. And that is that God always means it for good. And for that, I am very grateful. For that, I celebrate. I rejoice. And I also trust and know that the words I have spoken are true. And that they now live in our lives and move us forward. So once again, thank you, life. I call it good. And so it is.